Thank you all for joining us for the Online Teaching Strategies Workshop. Joining us today is Ted Weissman, Embedded Instructional Technologist for Online Education. He's going to discuss best practices for online teaching and keeping your students engaged. So I'm going to hand it over to Ted to get us started.
All right, thank you very much. So as Marlena said, I'm Ted Weissman. I serve the College of Education and the Colleges of Hospitality as their embedded instructional technologist. What essentially that means is I help people teach better online. I don't know if that's better English, but that's what we do. Our job, we differentiate ourselves from OIT in terms of we focus on the pedagogy and we focus on teaching and learning strategies, online course design, development, that type of thing, where OIT is more about the technology clicks and those types of things. So with that being said, I have a presentation that I'm gonna share, and I'm gonna share it kind of simply through Google, just because I have a couple other things that we're going to link to. But so just to kind of talk about what we're looking at. So we're looking at adapting educational best practices to the online environment. We're going to learn how to develop engaging course materials. We're going to learn some strategies to keep your students engaged in your online course and learn how to best communicate expectation with your students in the online environment. For those of you who have taken any of our previous trainings, there will be some overlap. So we do offer asynchronous trainings that cover a lot of these topics, and they focus on specific content areas from course organization to technology tools and resources, content materials, assessment and assignments and discussion. Please feel free to reach out to me at any point in time afterwards. I'll put my email in the chat at the end, and we can, if you have any questions. I was a GA, so I've been through a lot of this as well. So I was just trying to go through, think about my own experiences and go from there. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at the differences. And really, let's maybe have a conversation, and I'm okay with, and I'll pull up my chat as well so I can see. But the biggest thing to be aware of is that there's differences between teaching remotely and online teaching. This graphic is a great graphic, and just kind of it shows that when you're actually online teaching, you're doing more than just replicating what you did in your in-person class, or think about it almost like in remote teaching or teaching remotely is almost like triage, right? You're just dealing with the situation. It's like going to the emergency room for something, where online teaching is like going to a specialist. And so what the goal is that as instructors online is that we move ourselves to that online teaching specialist. And really one of the biggest things to think about, or one of the biggest takeaways to this, is that it's all about being deliberate and creating relevant and meaningful experiences online. So if you look at this kind of chart, it shows some of the things. A couple of terms that kind of pop out: community, quality, personalization, planning. These are all parts of the online teaching. Ultimately, we've done a lot of teaching remotely, though, if we're being completely honest, and I think we all can talk about, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to in a little bit. We can talk about what doesn't work with remote teaching or teaching remotely, and why it is better to be an online instructor or teach in the online space and really take that deliberately and meaningfully. So in order to become an online teacher, we have what we call the community of inquiry. And in this community of inquiry, there are 3 specific presences. One is the social presence. And it is exactly what you think it is. It's being social, it's presenting yourself in a way that is not just in an academic focus. You have a personality. The key part is that you're a real human being. You are more than just this two-dimensional instructor who is there as a vessel for content delivery. You're a person, you're a human being with interests, and you share those interests. You make it a point to engage with students on a personal level, and we'll talk more about what that might look like. The second presence is the cognitive presence, and here is where you create meaning. This is the difference between, in my opinion, one of the big areas that steps up where with the teaching remotely versus online teaching, is that you've gone through and created meaningful activities, discussions, readings, tasks, and students understand and they are able to grasp that there's more to it than just turning in an assignment, that there's a purpose behind the things that you do. So this is something that is really important that you're doing when you talk about, the online space, is that cognitive presence. And finally is the teaching presence. This is where you come into play, and it's the idea of facilitation. So there's, those terms like the sage on a stage and that type of thing. We're really trying to move away from that. There is a place for it. So I'm not going to say that there is not a place for that. I mean, in theory right now, I'm not by no stretch of the imagination a sage, but I am on the stage and I am the one who's disseminating information. But the goal should be to move away from that and move more toward a facilitative process. And so here's where you create also those clear outcomes and that are worthwhile for students. And as you put all three together, you get that center, which is ultimately the educational experience. So with that, what I have is I have created a Jamboard, and I'll go ahead and put it in the chat for everybody. And we've all been in online classes. We've all done it before. And what I'd like to know is some of the things that worked or didn't work for you in your online space. And for those of you who haven't used the Jamboard before, you go over here to the left side, you click a sticky note, and then you click the sticky note, you pick what you want to say. And what didn't work was canned discussions.
Can you give us access?
Oh, sure. Of course I can. Let's do that. All right, let's see. Hopefully now that should give you all access to it. Did that work?
Yeah, that worked.
Okay, so something that didn't work for me, I'm not a big fan of a canned discussion, right? I think that we have where it's the same thing that we're doing every single time. Okay, do the reading. I want you to ask a question and then put a reply. What has worked for me is, and I'll put a different color, is I'm a big fan of announcements that are not content related. And what I mean by that is that I think that there are people who, when people have used announcements to kind of ask about their day, to ask about what they're watching on TV, we're going to talk about high stakes versus low stakes. But, the idea that there's just a variety of different things that you can do to start engaging students. And I believe that ultimately one of the biggest challenges that we face is that we spend way too much time feeling like all we can do is talk about content. We can only be academic in the online space, and that is not true. So feel free to go ahead and throw some things out there. We got one, ask students to comment on other students. Yes, I agreed. And I have in here what I do have is when we go back to the presentation, and I'll leave this up and I'll go back to the presentation. If you want to post on here, feel free to. As we go through, we'll come back and check it back. We'll check back here in a little bit, but I'll go back to the presentation because I think what was put in that Jamboard is something that I have right here, right? Is being clear about expectations. And I'll also put this presentation in the chat for everybody, so that you can do direct links. So these are direct links for, related to, and hopefully it'll let me open up the comments through here. So fingers crossed. Oh, okay. You'll have to do it if you are going through your comment. If you have Commons access, those are links to Commons. I'll make them a different link so that you have access to them. But these were developed by an online instructor that gives explicit instructions on how to do group-led discussions, small group discussions, and so the key to that is that you have to be deliberate when we start. So I can speak for me. Before class, the key was determining roles. And what do I mean by that is that what are the roles that the students are going to play in the class? Are they going to be passive or are they going to be active? I can actually, Sarah and I took a class together, if I'm not mistaken, the mixed methods class. I think we both took. I think that was the class that we took.
Yep, that was it with Ben Dixon.
Yes, with Ben Dixon. And in that class, we were tasked with, creating essentially the lesson for the day. And so we did the readings, we had to come up with an activity, we had to be the ones responsible for guiding the discussion. We brought in outside resources where available. And I can honestly say, I did more work in that 1 week than I did for a lot of the other course, right? Because I was so invested in that assignment. In addition, the way that she had set up our learning logs, they were very explicit in what was expected of us. And so it wasn't just, hey, provide a question. No, we had to analyze and granted, doctoral level course, graduate students, there's different variation, but the key is that she didn't take for granted what our roles were as students. So she made it very clear to us that this is what's expected of us. Now, I could invest more or less in those assignments, but even my lowest level, because she was very clear about what she wanted from me before class, was a high level of engagement, in my opinion. Then the second thing you have to think about for your expectations is participation. And really, it comes down to how do you do this, okay? Now, there's a couple things that we have at our disposal, which when we go further down, I'll talk about, that we can raise the level of participation. One is having chat, having someone. There is nothing wrong with, for example, having a student monitor or facilitate chat. This is my personal opinion. You can have a moderator, and if you want to do that. Another thing is the chat function is highly, you can have, there is also the question and answer versus chats. There's also polling. There's a variety of things that you can use, and this is within WebEx, mind you. That is worthwhile to, explore and use. The functionality is great. Additionally, what does it look like for participation? Are you assigning grades? Are you being clear? And I think one of the big things to be aware of is that there are, EULOs about students being active in the class and being engaged, and they are related. And so you can have class level objectives, class learning objectives versus our undergraduate university learning objectives. So just make sure you're aligning with objectives. That's another thing just to keep in mind as you do things. And then lastly, after class, what we talk about continued engagement. Once again, I said I'm a big fan of an announcement. I like following up with class with an announcements. Hey, today we covered such and such. And, hey, reminder, we have a big assignment coming up next week. And this is a way that you are constantly, or you're going into the discussions, if there are discussions within your class, you personally are replying to discussions. You're not just a a passive observer, they get in there and have some comments. And the more that you comment, you'll be surprised that students are able to comment more as well. So with that, here is a plethora of resources related to how do we increase that level of engagement and interaction. Number one, and so I have Canvas, these are all things related to Canvas. If you're able to, and that would be actually a question for the group, is with your teaching ability, or if you are in online teaching, do you have the ability to go in and make edits within the courses, or are you just kind of administering something that the instructor has given you? What are some of the things that people are doing?
Do you mean, are we changing like course shells?
Yeah, like do you have the ability to go in and like edit a page and add anything in there?
Yeah. Yes.
Awesome. So if you do, I highly suggest that you embed videos if you haven't done it already. This is a link that helps show you how to embed videos, adding hyperlinks to things both within the course and externally. How to the assignments and discussions, which you already know, announcements, modules. If your course does not have modules, I highly suggest that you put them in there. It's a really easy thing to do where there are templates. There's OE templates. If you were to search within the Commons, the OE template, it gives you a weekly module. Modules are great. I would say one of the things that doesn't work for me, if I was to go back to the Jamboard, is a lack of modules. As I was saying before we started this class, or before we started this this little training, the class that I taught, all I had was a syllabus, readings, and uploaded files. That was it. That's what the Canvas shell consisted of. So anything else that I wanted to do, I had to create. And so I believe, if you haven't or don't know how to do modules, it's a pretty straightforward thing, but I'm a big fan of it. Also, the different types of pages that you can add. And then one of the big ones that I'm a big fan of is Canvas groups. For those of you who haven't used it before, creating groups within Canvas is just a great way of taking a larger class and making it a smaller class and giving people specific opportunities to do things. At that point, I'm going to pause real quick and ask if anybody has any questions, anything in specific, anything you want to know that you're like, it made a light bulb go off and you'd like to know something more.
Hey, Ted, I have a question.
Sure.
Maybe we'll get to this later, but like as a TA, maybe a lot of us are TAs. You were mentioning sort of editing the page, trying to add things. How would you suggest like we work that out with the teacher? How do you approach that with the person who's also responsible for that?
That's a great question. And I think what it comes down to is that the way that I would approach it is, what is essential content? Meaning, is it okay? I believe so. Some instructors, so it depends on what you're teaching. So I was teaching a College of Education seminar. So I was given a lot of latitude in terms of what I added to the course. So if I wanted to create a module that had additional reading, so we were doing moral relativism. So if I wanted to put some additional readings on moral relativism, if I wanted to create a discussion, I could do so. However, there was the required reading. And so my suggestion, what I think would be a great way to approach it, would be saying, hey, is it okay if I add on, if I supplement, if I add a page, hey, we were having a discussion about moral relativism versus moral realism, and this is what, if I wasn't given the opportunity, what I would suggest is I would reach out to the professor and I would say, hey, we were having a discussion in class, and you know what? They needed a lot more help. Like they weren't grasping the concept. By the end of the class, I was feeling like, you know what? I didn't really think that they got everything they needed? Is it okay if I add another page in there and I direct them to that or something like that? Or, hey, you want to know what? I'm trying to foster a little bit of extra community. Is it okay if I add a discussion? And, you know, start kind of, I would come from it in a way of you're trying to supplement, you're trying to increase engagement or activity. You are trying to foster community. Like, these are some of the words that I would use. That being said, if I don't know, you know, what, you know, I don't know who's teaching what, and, you know, I'm always, just want people to be aware that it is, you know, for me, I was fortunate in that regard that I was able to add things, but it was a double-edged sword. I was also responsible if I put something wrong in there. So you got to like kind of take both sides with it. But that would be how I would approach reaching out to a professor and trying to add stuff.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. With that, then I'll go ahead and I'll talk a little bit about some of the other options that are available. So one is, if you're using WebEx, the use of breakout rooms, please use them. They are your friend. They're available in all the other platforms as well. However, WebEx is the one platform that is supported by UNLV and OIT. So if you run into challenges with Zoom or Google or something else, you don't have that recourse. In addition, WebEx is integrated through Canvas. So if you do go through Canvas and do WebEx through Canvas, not only can it take attendance, you can set up meetings. There's a lot of other resources available. So I highly suggest using WebEx. It also integrates really well with Panopto. If you are not familiar with Panopto, I suggest clicking on the link that is in here. This takes you to a variety. OIT does some great trainings on both WebEx and Panopto. And they really kind of talk about recording videos, how to record them. Panopto is great for editing videos also. So if you haven't used it, you can just fool around with it. They just created, or they just released kind of a web-based Panopto browser that you don't have to do it through the download. You can do it web-based. I suggest you do the downloaded version, but the web-based one is very easy and user-friendly. I'm a big fan of Google, the Google Jamboard, Google Docs, and Google Slides. For those, I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone has used these within their classes, but they're great shareables, and I'm a fan of anything that's shareable. That helps do that. Offline interactions. So this is kind of an important topic, or it's a topic worth kind of exploring. Students, especially if you have a project or you're doing things, I know, so when I was a GA, we had a collaborative argumentation that students were expected to work on outside of class. So I made a Google form that I had access to, and I made it available where they could kind of put their ideas, they can formulate their plan for the collaborative argumentation, assign roles, do whatever. But I was also clear about what was expected within that document. So if you're having offline interactions, just be sure that you are aware of, you know, there is some sort of accountability measure in place, that so that you can monitor what's going on, because the last thing you want to do also is have offline interactions that are potentially unacceptable or inappropriate. You want to be able to just monitor what's going on. This is a great video that's related to learning styles, and it helps you understand just the different types of learners that we have within, you know, whether you're a visual learner, you're auditory, kinesthetic, so it's the VARC model. And then the next thing that I would also, so that's, once again, I'm going to pause real quick because I'm just throwing a lot of things out there that I think, you know, just to kind of give a little bit of kind of context, or give any questions, concerns, issues. All right. That's not a lot of wait time, but that's okay. Usually you're supposed to give like a little longer wait time. It's okay for there to be silence. But I'll give you more silence after. The next thing is the virtual office hours. I highly suggest that if you have not done virtual office hours, or I think it is something that you should plan on doing. And this is just kind of is a video, if I'm not mistaken, from an instructor talking about, what they got out of virtual office hours. I don't know about you. I've gone to virtual office hours. I've gone to more virtual office hours than I ever did in-person office hours, which is kind of weird because it was just easier to pop in and pop out. I didn't feel like obligated, or it wasn't as big a deal. I know also people offer the virtual office hours for a purpose, right? So there's a big project coming up. There's a big exam. There's a big assignment. There's a big whatever. And they're providing a time, hey, come and talk to me, ask me questions. That's another way to do it. It doesn't need to just be, hey, I'm available on Thursday at 3 p.m. It can be, hey, you want to know what? I know that we have this big thing coming up. Make sure that, please feel free. You can also set up appointments in WebEx. So that's another thing to do. The second to last thing is UNLV resources. Do not feel like you are in this alone. And what I mean by that is that there are a plethora of resources in the online space, or at UNLV through OIT, the Writing Center, the Academic Success Center. Give these resources to students. Do not feel like you have to shoulder the burden of everything as the instructor. Let them reach out. Let them do some of their own work, especially if we're talking about graduate students, or we're talking about, and I would even argue just anybody who's a college student. They can benefit, and we're all learning. And I feel like the bar is being raised in terms of what we're expecting of students at lower levels. And when I say lower level, I mean like, first year, second year, third year, not graduate students. And they're much more savvy. And on top of that, so I have a 19-year-old son. My son is a sophomore, sorry, it's the language. So he's a second-year student, and he's been using Canvas for 4 years. So he's more savvy with Canvas in some ways than I am as a student. So there's no reason why you shouldn't be reaching out to other resources on campus, but also reaching out to your students. Ask them what's working for them, what's working, what's not working. Please do not be scared. One thing I didn't include in this, which I will talk about, is the idea of a mid-semester survey, where you're asking about things that are working in your class or not working in your class. I highly suggest that you do that. Students are not shy. I will say that. I mean, I remember being a very nervous undergraduate student 20-something years ago, 26 years ago. And I would never have said anything if you begged me to. I wouldn't have, like, I just went to class to be quiet and kind of learn and then go on with my day. But these students, I feel like we've created a culture, which I think is a good culture, that they do advocate. They advocate for themselves. They advocate for their learning. They advocate for a better experience. And I think we as instructors should be receptive to that. The last thing is I have an example. So these are assignments that talked about student to content interaction. So these are, and for everyone to kind of see later, student to instructor interaction, and then there's student to student interaction. And I'm not going to go through it right now, but what I will go back to and say is that think about going back to the whole idea about what your roles are right? What are the roles, participation? When we talk about students, what are the students doing? Are they interacting with content? Are they interacting with the instructor? Or are they interacting with each other? And we should be asking that question when we start and when we design our course so that we know what we want them to be doing. And so these are all questions that I can't necessarily answer for you. I think what I'm trying to do is maybe pique your own introspective, reflective self so that you start looking at what is in your course that you're teaching, and you're looking at it in terms of what is it that the student experience is having, because you also have the benefit of being a student as well, right? You are a graduate student, and so you know what worked for you. And if you have the ability to remedy the things that didn't work for you, I suggest that you do that. One of the last things that I have in here is I have some resources, difference between teaching remotely and teaching online. On our website, these are some teaching remotely tips on the website for OE, the Teach Online website. There's a lot of great resources here available for you. And it just kind of lets you know that, just some other things to do. Communicate with students, assessment. I don't need to really do this, but I will say down here is some great self-paced trainings, how to, this is just a great resource for you as an instructor, just for your own knowledge. And then this document I added because if you are one of those graduate students who just feels the need to, immerse yourself in resources, and not that you have time. I know I don't necessarily have the time as well as a graduate student and working and doing the things that I'm doing. But this is got a ton of resources related to just high quality, and I don't, if you're familiar with HQSI, so high quality student instruction, they kind of created this little playbook. And so just another resource for you. I tried my best to provide people with as many resources as possible. And in terms of the presentation, that's kind of it. What I wanted to do is, and look at that, we go back to the Jamboard and people have put things on there, and now we can just have the rest of the time to talk about that. But before we go to the Jamboard and discuss that, I'll just ask if there's any questions about the presentation or anything, besides me making sure that you guys have access to those 3 links. Anything about the presentation that I can kind of clarify or talk a little bit more about before we talk about the Jamboard. And you can just put in the chat that we're good. That's awesome. Thank you. Oh, let's see. That's another one. You can just, sometimes all you got to do, I'm just a fan of a thumbs up, but also, one thing to be aware of, and I think that it's really important, and I think it's worth addressing while I have everybody, is not everybody has the same technology access. And with that, we have this assumption that everybody should be able to turn on their cameras, be available, do the same things, all that stuff. Some people might not feel comfortable putting themselves on camera. And this is why one of the things that you can do is do a technology survey or a technology access survey in the beginning of class, just to know what people are dealing with. Some people are accessing their stuff only through a mobile phone. They don't necessarily have a laptop. They might not have the bandwidth to be able to turn on their video. They might not be comfortable turning on their video because of their living situation and things like that. This goes to the idea of inclusivity and being aware of who your students are and where they're coming from. So I tend to, this is something that I have had to work on in my own practice as an instructor, because I'm guilty of certain things like, okay, everybody just do something. And when you say everybody, you're assuming everybody has the same access. That's a challenge, and it's something that we should try to address. Number two is inclusive language. And I think that that's an important thing. One of the things that you really want to do is, if you have the ability to, and this goes back to that, addressing stuff with an instructor, we're not the ones creating the syllabi, or we're not creating content, but wherever you can revise language to make it more inclusive, I think most instructors seem to be amenable to that and agreeable to it. And I don't think, and we're living in 2021. And so I think it's really important that we engage in that dialogue. Inclusive language is important, and that inclusivity starts with the syllabus. And so just making sure that the syllabus is geared towards everybody. So that's my little pedestal that I'll just kind of hop down from. But let's look at some of the things that were in the, so we'll start with the things that didn't work. Definitely by appointment only. We got to make ourselves available. Students, they have higher demands. I really think that, that by appointment doesn't work. And then we had the comment on discussions. I'm interested to see what did work. I like the regular weekly announcements. The Friday, a look ahead. That's awesome. Great practice. And you want to know what? If you start something in the beginning and you're able to maintain it with consistency, students seem to respond to that. That if they then expect it and appreciate it. I think my way of being, I tend to be someone who leans more into the explicit and maybe the over explanation, because I would rather students, we can't take for granted that students just know what we're thinking. And what's missing from the in-person interaction is that if you're in an in-person class, when students check out, right? When they're not really paying attention, when, like, you get a feeling it's kind of clear. You don't have that in the online space. So you might as well take a minute and add to it. You might as well take the time to be more explicit, give them instructions, give it to them again, maybe give it to them one time. The worst thing that happens is a student tells you is like, hey, you want to know what? You oversaturated us with information and you gave it to us too many times. I'd rather be the instructor that gave it to them too many times than not enough times. I was more explicit than less explicit. So I'm a big fan of that. Great idea. Open notes video. Oh, you're speaking my language with that one. And what I mean by that is that we live in 2021. The internet is our friend. And if you're asking good questions, and what I mean by a good question, it's a question that I can't just look up. It's a question that is higher level blooms. It's asking for some analysis. It's asking for some evaluation. It's asking for critical thinking. Then guess what they have to do? It doesn't matter if they have their notes open. Then they have to actually digest the information and give you something that they have come up with an original thought. So open notes and then video quizzes, go for it. That just means you're doing a better job of creating a more engaging assignment. So I love it right there. Establishing expectations for feedback. Oh, once again, right on point. I think that this is something that is really good in terms of, feedback is only as good in terms of how much you give it and how detailed it is. The words good job don't really mean a lot, all things considered. So you want to make sure that you have set the expectation, but I will say you've also set a reasonable expectation. This is not everything requires a dissertation. There is a time and a place for a thank you for the insight. And then there is the time, clear rubrics. I love it. Things just pop up. I'm sorry. I just see it and I'm like, yes, game on. But I think that lines up with the clear rubrics. And I like the way you put it right next to it. Visuals help me too. but it's important for just being clear about that. Thank you. So, you know, and that last sentence I think is a really important one. If they need to email you for more, what does that look like, right? Like that you have set up the proper protocols for what those interactions look like. Creating modules that are organized with external resources. We talked about modules, big fan of the module. If you're not using modules, you need to get on the module train. And we actually have a whole asynchronous training that talks about how to create modules. So if you need that, let me know and I'll hit you up. I'll send you the link to it. Start semester one-on-one. Oh, okay. I had this conversation today in an earlier training where we were talking about how I did one-on-one meetings with, so we had about 25 students, and I would say I met with about 90% of them, so 18 to 20 students. It was an opportunity for me to lay out the big picture of the course and explain to them individually what they needed, but also for them to tell me challenges they might be facing, right? I work full time. I'm taking care of someone. This is my first semester. I don't have regular access to the internet. I had a student tell me that, you want to know what? I have an insane fear related to, having a discussion in front of a lot of people. So, how do I address that for the collaborative argumentation? And, it was just an opportunity for them to speak one-on-one with me so that I was able to get a better understanding of them and then also lay the foundation for what they would need for the semester. And that level of comfort that was created in that one-on-one meeting was such a positive experience, I feel like, for me, but also for the student. But what I noticed is the students that I didn't have one-on-ones with, they definitely met more challenges. And they were, especially on the bigger tasks, the bigger assignments, the things like that. So if you can carve out that time for those one-on-ones. Now, let's be realistic. In a class of 20 to 25, you can maybe pull that off. In the larger classes, maybe not. But how can you replicate that, right? What are some things that you can do? You can create a discussion forum where you have an ongoing questions about the course or questions about big assignments or questions, a Q&A kind of discussion that's available for students to kind of put in there that they're doing. You set up those office hours like we had talked about where you're providing opportunity. Hey, you want to know what? This is just a check-in office hours to see where everyone's at in the beginning. And maybe you can get a few more people because ultimately the goal is to get and reach as many students as possible. And the more opportunities that we create, the better opportunity they have for being successful. And I think with that covers our Jamboard, which I thank you so much for participating. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and just open it up for just any general questions, any general comments, concerns, anything in specific, anything you dealt with that you're dealing with right now that I could maybe give some insight to.
I have another question, Ted, if no one else does.
Sure.
Your specific examples of your experience has been so helpful. If we imagine we are teaching a couple of huge classes or we're TAs for just a lot of people, I would love to, in some way be able to meet with a lot of them or interact with them in a more personal level. Do you have any strategies for that when it's 130 people or something like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think the groups function in Canvas, and there's some links in the presentation. The groups function is a great way to narrow that down. Also, and so within groups, what you essentially do is you create for whatever the topic is, and you can create it for a plethora of topics. But that's one way where you can kind of maybe put kids into groups of maybe 20, right? And then within that group of 20, maybe you pose a question for that smaller group just to kind of get to know them. Maybe once again, talking about that high stakes, low stakes, you know, something a little bit more, maybe it doesn't have to be content related, and get to know them. Or if you want, so that's the groups function. It's a very easy, it's very intuitive, and it automatically breaks them up, or you can assign them individually. You can kind of pick and choose how you assign the groups. The other thing I would say is within WebEx and doing breakout rooms or breakout sessions. Those are another thing where you can kind of pop in and be a moderator or be someone that goes in there to those breakout sessions and provide some, you know, feedback, or just be there to listen to some conversation and, you know, just get to know what people are talking about. And then you can kind of come back. The breakout sessions, one of the things that's really good about breakout sessions within WebEx is the broadcast function. Definitely, I'll come back. That's a great, we'll talk about that one in a second in the chat. But in the breakout sessions, there's the broadcast function where you can broadcast to everybody in there, but also you can go into each specific breakout session. The introduction discussion board, one of the really good things that I've seen done is where people have created a Google slideshow, where they did a slideshow where they do an introduction and they add some pictures, some comments, and everyone adds a slide. You add your own slide, and they actually incorporated it into a discussion. So you could go in and then you can make comments within the discussion. But the introduction is a great way for you to start to get to know people. And it doesn't have to be, you know, tell me one thing about yourself. I've had to do Flipgrid introductions. I've done a video introduction. Flipgrid is also integrated into Canvas as well. But there are other ways to do it, so it's more than just the text. And that is one thing that I'll kind of a point that I'll make, is that you don't need to just rely solely on text. There are a lot of options now where you can do things where you have not only video, audio, you can do audio feedback, you can do video feedback. I had an instructor earlier today. She teaches doctoral students, and she does solely video feedback for her asynchronous class. And she said it was one of the best things because it put a face. They knew that there was a person that was there, and the students really enjoyed having that feedback in that mode. So that is just a great kind of way of, you know, just moving beyond just the standard way of doing things.
Any other questions for Ted before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to chime in and say the comment about accessibility or inclusive language. You know, please make sure that that is something that we really we need to be aware of. So definitely there are trainings available related to inclusive language and accessibility. I highly suggest looking at those. For those also, I guess in the chat, there is a survey. So we want to make sure that you take that, correct?
Correct. So thank you, Ted, for presenting and sharing your time and expertise with us today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Before you all log off, if you could just take a few minutes to fill out our workshop feedback survey. We dropped it in the chat. We would really appreciate it.
Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for your participation as well.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ted.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks, Ted.